It's 3 a.m. in Cape Canaveral, and you haven't slept since the Obama administration. You're sitting in a suit that costs more than a fleet of Ferraris, smelling like a mix of industrial rubber and your own nervous sweat. Welcome to the Artemis program, rookie. Everyone thinks being an astronaut is all about the slow-motion walks and the cool patches on the shoulder. They see the PR photos of smiling heroes. What they don't see is the 3 gallons of caffeine currently vibrating in your veins and the terrifying realization that you are about to sit on top of the Space Launch System, the SLS, essentially a 300-foot skyscraper filled with enough explosive propellant to level a small city. You're not a pilot right now. You're a high-stakes passenger on a controlled explosion. The countdown starts, and your heart rate is doing things your doctor would call a medical emergency. But out here, we just call it Monday. You feel the rumble. It's not a vibration, it's a tectonic shift. The solid rocket boosters ignite, and suddenly the laws of physics decide to sit on your chest. You're pulling 4 Gs. Your internal organs are trying to migrate to your spine. You want to scream, but you can't breathe. And besides, the radio is screaming with telemetry data that sounds like a dial-up modem having a stroke. 8 minutes later, the noise stops. You're in orbit. You unbuckle, and for about 5 seconds, it's magical. Then the space adaptation syndrome kicks in. That's NASA's fancy way of saying your brain is currently convinced you're poisoned because your inner ear has no idea which way is up, and you're about to projectile vomit into a zero-gravity cabin. And guess what? There's no janitor in low Earth orbit. You have to catch it with a bag before it clogs the life support filters. This is the glamour of spaceflight. You're in the Orion capsule now. It's the size of a small SUV, and you're sharing it with 3 other people for 10 days. Imagine a road trip with your coworkers where you can't open the windows, you can't shower, and the bathroom is a vacuum-powered tube that requires a PhD to operate without creating a biohazard floater. The air smells like recycled farts and ozone. The constant hum of the CO2 scrubbers is the only thing keeping you from suffocating in a bubble of your own exhaled breath. You're checking the RCS thrusters, reaction control system, because if one of those tiny nozzles gets stuck, you'll start spinning until you're a human centrifuge. You're 240,000 miles from the nearest ER. If you get an appendicitis out here, your crewmate has to cut you open using a YouTube tutorial and a prayer. We call this the graveyard shift of the heavens. You spend your routine day staring at monitors, fighting the urge to itch your nose inside a pressurized helmet, and realizing that the only thing between you and the cold, unfeeling vacuum of the void is a few inches of aluminum and the hope that the lowest bidder on the heat shield contract actually knew what they were doing. You're tired. Your bones are already losing calcium. Your eyes are starting to reshape because the fluid in your head is drifting upward. You look in the mirror and your face is puffy. Moon face, they call it. You look like a psycho who hasn't slept in a week because, well, you are. But you have to stay sharp because the TLI burn, the trans-lunar injection, is coming up. That's the moment we kick the door down and leave Earth behind. If the engine doesn't fire, we're just the world's most expensive piece of space junk. If it fires too long, we're headed for the sun. It's a game of millimeters played at 25,000 miles per hour. You don't just become an Artemis astronaut because you have a nice smile and a degree from MIT. You get here by surviving a multi-year gauntlet of psychological and physical torture that would make a Navy SEAL reconsider his life choices. NASA doesn't want heroes. They want high-functioning robots that can stay calm while their hair is on fire. It starts with the NBL, the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's a giant pool in Houston containing a full-scale mock-up of the spacecraft. You spend 6 hours at a time underwater in a suit that weighs 300 pounds, fighting against the resistance of the water, trying to turn a single bolt with gloves that feel like they're filled with lead. Your fingers are bleeding, your cooling garment is leaking, and you have a cramp in your calf that you literally cannot reach. If you panic, you're out. If you complain, you're out. Next is the vomit comet. We put you in a plane that flies in parabolas to simulate weightlessness.
You do it 40 times a day. Most people spend the afternoon staring at the floor, wondering why they didn't just become accountants. Then there's the centrifuge. They strap you into a spinning arm and crank it up until your face looks like it's melting off your skull. They want to see if you can still flip the right switches when you're pulling 8 Gs and your vision is narrowing into a tiny black tunnel. It's called G-lock avoidance, but to us, it's just the human juicer. And the classroom work? It's enough to make your brain leak out of your ears. You have to memorize every single valve, wire, and software line in the Orion's flight computer. You need to be a plumber, an electrician, a computer scientist, and a surgeon all at once. We spend hundreds of hours in the simulators. The instructors are sadists. They wait until you're exhausted, 3 hours into a simulated re-entry, and then they break the main computer, leak the oxygen tank, and set off a fire alarm just to see if you'll cry. You don't cry. You just drink more coffee and find a workaround. You go to survival school in the wilderness because if the capsule splashes down off course in the middle of the Pacific or a Russian forest, you need to know how to kill a snake and make a radio out of a soda can. The failure rate is astronomical. For every 1,000 applicants, maybe 1 gets the blue flight suit. And once you have it, the pressure only gets worse. You're representing the entire human race. If you screw up a docking maneuver, you're not just a bad employee, you're the guy who ruined the 21st century's greatest adventure. You live in a state of perpetual code black readiness. You learn to sleep in 2-hour increments. You learn to eat space food that has the texture of wet cardboard and the flavor of regret. You spend months in Hera, the human exploration research analog, locked in a tiny habitat with 3 people you'll eventually want to strangle, just to prove you won't actually do it when you're halfway to the moon. By the time you're standing on the launch pad for Artemis II, you're not even a person anymore. You're a biological extension of the Orion flight system. You're overworked, you're overtrained, and you have enough radiation badges to know that your chance of getting cancer in 20 years just went up by 40%. But you look at the moon and you realize it's the only place in the universe where you might actually get some peace and quiet.
This is it. The translunar injection was successful. The Earth is now a small, fragile marble in the rearview mirror. You're traveling at speeds that would make a fighter pilot weep, but inside the cabin, it's deathly silent. This is the free return trajectory. We aren't landing yet. That's for Artemis III. We are the pathfinders. Our job is to swing around the far side of the moon, further than any human being has ever traveled. As the lunar horizon rises, it's not romantic, it's terrifying. The moon isn't a glowing lantern, it's a jagged, colorless desert of death. There's no atmosphere to soften the shadows, so the craters look like bottomless pits of pure obsidian. Then it happens. The loss of signal, LOS. As you slip behind the far side of the moon, the radio goes dead. Houston is gone. Your family is gone. The internet, the news, the 8 billion people screaming at each other on a rock behind you, all gone. You are officially the most isolated humans in history. For 30 minutes, it's just you, your crew, and the ticking of the life support system. This is where the psycho face becomes permanent. You're staring at the gauges. Radiation levels are spiking because a solar flare just kicked off, and you're currently being peppered by subatomic particles that are literally passing through your brain and leaving tiny microscopic trails of damage. You can actually see flashes of light when you close your eyes. That's cosmic rays hitting your retina. It's beautiful and lethal. You're checking the oxygen levels. Orion is performing its barbecue roll, spinning slowly to distribute the heat from the sun so one side doesn't melt while the other freezes. If that motor stops, the capsule warps. You reach the Apocrycynthian, the furthest point from Earth. You look out the window and you see it, Earthrise. The entire history of humanity, every war, every kiss, every cold pizza, all contained in a tiny blue speck that you could cover with your thumb. It's the overhead effect, hitting you like a freight train. You realize how small we are and how much of a miracle it is that your life support hasn't exploded yet. But the mission isn't over. You have to come home.
Re-entry isn't a graceful glide, it's a violent, screaming assault on the atmosphere. You're hitting the air at 25,000 miles per hour. The friction turns the air around the capsule into plasma. The temperature outside is 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, half as hot as the surface of the sun. The window is a wall of fire. You're pulling 7 Gs now. Your lungs are collapsing under your own weight. You're praying the skip re-entry maneuver works, bouncing off the atmosphere like a stone on a pond to bleed off speed. If the angle is too steep, you incinerate. If it's too shallow, you bounce off into deep space forever. The parachutes deploy, a series of violent jerks that feel like being in a car crash 3 times in a row. You hit the Pacific Ocean with the force of a falling piano. The capsule is bobbing in the waves, and you're back to being seasick. The recovery divers arrive. They pop the hatch, and the smell of fresh, salty Earth air hits you. It's the best thing you've ever smelled. You're weak, you can't walk, and your balance is completely destroyed. You've just cheated death for 10 days. You've seen the dark side of the moon and survived the graveyard shift of the cosmos. As they lift you onto the deck of the USS San Diego, you look at the camera, give a shaky thumbs up, and think, I need a goddamn espresso and a nap that lasts for 3 years. You're an Artemis astronaut. You're a survivor. And you're already wondering when the next flight is.